Welcome to the Nerds and Friends podcast. Today we are doing episode, I forgot what it is, 57, 58? Doesn't matter. It's going to be an awesome episode. I'm Josh Lindquist. I have my co-host Will Shaw here. And today we are joined by Hikari Leilani Miya. And I want to read her bio for you guys because she sent us the coolest bio of any guest we've gotten so far. So I'm just going to jump right in. So Hikari Leilani Miya is an LGBTQ Japanese Filipina American who graduated from Cornell University with a BA in English and from the University of San Francisco with an MFA in creative writing. She is in Florida State University's PhD program in creative writing. Her poems have been published or are forthcoming in dozens of in-print and online magazines across North America. And I'm going to put a list in the podcast or video description based on where you're watching this so you can see all of those publications written out. In 2021, she was a semi-finalist for the Red Wheelbarrow Poetry Prize, judged by Mark Doty. Her first poetry manuscript has been accepted for publication by Cornerstone Press. Congratulations, that is awesome. She currently lives in Tallahassee and this is where it starts getting even more awesome, her snakes and disabled cat, and worked recently as a behavioral specialist for youth on the spectrum, as a private tutor and a freelance writer, in addition to earning her master's certification in herpetology from the Amphibian Foundation. She is also a percussionist, pianist, and competitive card game player. I have so many questions because that is the coolest bio I have ever read. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. This is my first podcast, and I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, congratulations. That's awesome. Well, so I think the first question I need to ask is, what is herpetology? I have not heard of this before.
Yeah, a lot of people, when they hear it, they get kind of confused because they think it's a study of herpes, which is not what that is. Herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians. So, the Amphibian Foundation out of Atlanta, Georgia, had an online program where you could earn your master's certification by doing, I think it was like 15 weeks, like a few months of pre-recorded lectures, and then you take a final exam, you do some projects. It was really interesting. All of the papers were engaging, all of the speakers were engaging. It was definitely one of the best investments that I made.
That's really cool. So, like, is the focus just on the study of reptiles, like in general, or is it like specific to medical conditions or like care of them, or?
With herpetology, it's such a diverse field because we could look at ecology, we could look at medical problems, we could look at conservation, things that are currently going on in the community, especially in the Amphibian Foundation out of Georgia, is that they are working on conserving the critically endangered frostwood flatwood salamander. And they are, I think, the only organization in the world that has that breeding conservation program.
Wow.
So we do focus a lot about education and conservation, and then we learn a little bit of the history as well as the taxonomy. And we even had like a lecture about the physics of frog jumping, which was it was very detailed.
That's cool.
I do have to give you a lot of credit studying herpetology, and yet you still decided to live in Florida.
Yeah, it was great. Florida State University called me up. They offered me the scholarship, and then I looked into their program. I looked into the professors. All of the staff are super great. I visited in April after I accepted, and I was just like, "This is it. This is where I want to be. I want to see all the alligators. I want to see all the frogs, and it's great." I currently volunteer on Saturdays at the Tallahassee Museum, which is actually a zoo that
Oh,
has
wow.
it has a plantation on it, and it has a 18th century farm on it, or 19th century farm on it. So I work in the snake house with the snakes. We do have a eastern indigo snake. She is the longest, her species is the longest snake east of the Mississippi River. And there's an active conservation program for those snakes in the wild, and she is gorgeous. And I love working with all of our snakes that we have there.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So, how long is, you said it was a blue indigo snake? How long are
Yeah,
they?
so the Eastern indigo can get to about 7 feet long. They could get really long, and
Whoa.
ours is not fully grown. And she's just a handful, an armful, a whole body full. It takes both my arms to make sure that her body is supported.
Oh,
And
wow.
she's tolerant for the most part of being handled.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
What's like the most challenging part of caring for snakes or other reptiles? Like what's the most challenging aspect to it?
I think with I guess reptile and amphibian care would fall under exotic pet keeping. And the hardest things with those is just making sure that you have all of the things that the animal needs to live like a safe and healthy and comfortable life because you want what's best for them. A
Yeah.
lot of these animals are technically not considered domesticated animals. And even with snakes that have been bred in captivity that you can get from reptile shows, such as the snakes that I have, you want to make sure that you're handling them with care, that you're just not flopping them around, that you're supporting their body. You want to make sure that they have a consistent feeding schedule, that you're feeding them the right size of prey, that you're feeding the right type of prey. You're checking their feces to make sure it looks normal. You're making sure that their sheds are normal, their humidity levels are right, and their temperature requirements are right. I know that sounds like a lot, but snakes are actually a lot lower on the maintenance level for reptiles. Whereas if you have, say, frogs in for amphibians, what's really hard about frogs is that a lot of people like to handle and touch their pets. With frogs, you can't really do that because anything on your hands is going to be absorbed into their skin, into their bloodstream.
Uh,
So you can't handle frogs for more than say like 15 minutes because if you say have lotion on your hands, which a lot of people do, that lotion will go into the frog's bloodstream, and then later on, the frog could get really sick or possibly pass away.
oh
So
wow.
frogs are great observation animals, but not particularly great for handleable pets.
That's good to know. I never would have thought of that. That's
Yeah.
my only experience with snakes is that I was working on a TV commercial once, and we had some large snakes on the set, so I got to handle them for one scene, and that was super cool because I'd never held a large snake before, so that was really fun. I forget what species it was, but I was fascinated by, and maybe you could expand on how they do this. Like, I was nervous going to hold the snake, and the snake handler said, just make sure you're relaxed because the snake will kind of read your body language and kind of mirror it to some degree. And I noticed that when I kind of relaxed, I felt the snake kind of relax too. Like, is that normal among most snake species?
I've never really heard that one before. I feel like snakes, it's really hard to read into their emotions and their psychology, just because we don't really know like what they're thinking about, and then we don't know how they perceive us, which is a
Uh,
really interesting conversation that I'm having actually in my eco-criticism class on the PhD level. We talk a lot about the perception of animals and how we perceive them. With bigger snakes, because they do have a bigger surface area and they're going to be touching more of your body, they are going to be able to sense if you're tensed up. A lot of them most of the times will have been tolerant of handling, especially if they grew up having been handled.
okay.
They don't recognize you as a prey item. So a lot of the bigger snakes tend to be constrictors, which means that they constrict their prey instead of using venom. So because the animal's not actively trying to eat you, it could sense that you are tensed up. What snakes normally do, since they don't have any limbs, is that they're going to have to tense up some of their muscles to hang on to your body so that they don't fall off. So
That
in
makes
any
sense.
case, the snake is going to be tensed up in some point, whether it's a small snake on your hand or a big snake wrapped around, like say, your shoulders. They're going to have to find some stability just because it's harder for them to keep a hold on you.
That makes sense.
That
Yeah.
is actually a really interesting point because I've actually heard similar things from snake handlers. Here in Colorado, we have the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, which is a nature preserve, as well as the Denver Zoo. And if you go up into the mountains, we have Dinosaur Ridge, where they have a large reptile collection as well. And like I've heard similar things, and I never even thought to question that of like, how would we understand the psychology of a snake, or like, how would you even like try to study that with something that is just so absolutely foreign to the human experience?
Yeah, you make a really good point. In our eco-criticism class, we talk about how a lot of animals are anthropomorphized, and how people give them human characteristics, where, a lot of it dating, even back to biblical times, will say, oh, snakes are evil, because they were
Mm-hmm.
Satan. And then it's just carried on. So it's just like, I was in my
Yeah.
poetry workshop and my professor said, oh, men are snakes. And then I was like, oh, hey, I feel like, maybe I kind of know what you mean, but I feel like, maybe we can move past that, right? So all snakes aren't bad. There's no snake that wakes up in the morning and says, I want to go eat a human today and I'm just going to bite for fun. Like if you get
Right.
bitten by a snake, you have to realize that any animal with a mouth or claws, they could bite, they could scratch, regardless of whether they're domesticated or not. It just depends on their environment and what stressors they have. With snakes, a lot of people think that if you get bitten, that it's their fault, where in actuality, it was you invading their space, and that's the only way how snakes are able to respond with their lack of limbs.
Totally. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is fascinating. So, but I do have to, like, with your amazing biography that Josh was kind enough to read off, I do have to wonder, like, when do you sleep?
When do I sleep? So there are some days, well, I'll just work really hard. I'll be writing, I'll be reading. This semester I'm teaching 2 sections of a rhetoric and composition class, which is a requirement for all of the undergrads at FSU. So I'm giving a lot of my time for them, grading papers, answering questions. And, that takes up the majority of my day. But being having been more mindful from undergrad, which was pretty sleepless, I've been catching up on those sleepless nights. There are days where if I have nothing going on, which is very rare for me to have nothing going on, I can get up to like 12 hours of sleep, and I'll just sleep in, and it's the greatest thing. I used to take sleep for granted. Like when I was a little kid, my mom made me take naps, and I was like, I don't want to take a nap, and I just wanted to get up and play. And now I'm just like, I wish I could take a nap right now, but no, I have to be in office hours.
Yeah.
No,
I totally understand. And yet you still also you fit competitive card playing in. Like, can I ask, like, so what card games specifically are we talking? Like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh or poker or?
I grew up learning how to play I guess Texas Hold'em. My dad taught me. And then when I was growing up, I was really into Pokemon, and I still am. I am part of the Pokemon Go Discord group in Tallahassee. I go and raid with all my friends on Wednesday night. I meet people for trades. I've met a lot of friends through there, and they're all super cool. And then I know that a lot of my relatives knew I was into Pokemon, but Yu-Gi-Oh was also a thing that was like on TV. I would watch episodes of it, so I was very familiar with it. I would get a lot of Pokemon cards for my birthday, which is what I wanted. And then confused relatives would also give me Yu-Gi-Oh cards for my birthday, which is not what I wanted. And then I looked at them and I was like, well, some of the art is scary, but some of the art is really cool. Like they had Blue Eyes White Dragon, which is now my main deck archetype. So since I was a little kid, I did collect Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and in high school, I was taught how to play the correct way instead of just like putting random cards down. It's pretty. It's a little more complicated, and the game has gotten way more complicated over time. The text has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller and longer and longer and longer. So people sit there and just squint at cards in their hand while they're reading and trying to figure out what to do and figuring out all these mad combos and getting out like dozens of monsters in one turn and into their graveyard. So it's quite a process. And even though I'm not the best at it, I play to have fun. So my main archetype is the Blue Eyes White Dragon deck. I've spent years developing that deck. It's very expensive. It's like $437 in my last count.
Wow.
And then I duel on Sundays with my Yu-Gi-Oh group, and then I'll just walk in and play people that completely destroy me, and I'm just like, dang, like how much is your deck? And they're, oh, it's just like 1,200, and I'm just like, just and then like they'll just be like, yeah, this is just like a hobby. And I was like, yeah, I have hobbies too, but they're like snake related and sword related, and so it just depends on how much people are into it. I'm really into the business of buying cards and then just reselling them. I tend to get really lucky with some of the blind box pulls I get. So
nice.
This coming Sunday, I'm going to a tournament with some friends, just 45 minutes up north in Georgia. We're gonna have a good time, do some duels, networks with some people, and hopefully I could sell a few things.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How many cards are in a Yu-Gi-Oh deck? I haven't played the Yu-Gi-Oh game before.
So for Yu-Gi-Oh, it has to be between 40 and 60. Most people stick to the 40 card deck, especially if they know what they want to draw and they know exactly what combos they want, because a lot of decks are based off of just a couple monsters, and that's the main archetype. There are specific decks that are like mill decks or burn decks where you just want to send as many cards from your deck or hand to the graveyard as possible. The early edition of like Lightsworn decks were like that. So I have a 60 card Lightsworn deck. if you want bigger decks like that, but they just tend to be a little bit more clunky, even though there are lots of really good cards that can fit in all decks. It's just, you know, matter of personal taste of what you want and what will work for you.
Totally. That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your writing. And then we gotta circle back to percussion eventually, because that's awesome.
Yeah.
But so
Yeah,
like
definitely.
how did your writing career start? Like what got you into writing? What are some of your goals you know, with your poetry and your writing? I wanted to hear more about that.
Oh man, I guess it started when I was really young. I really enjoyed reading since I was really young. When I was in first grade, they gave us like the California Standardized Reading Test or whatever it was they gave us, and they found that I was able to read at a high school level in the first grade, which was
Oh, wow.
great. So I was just picking up books and reading them and just having a good time, because that's just I didn't really hang out with like my friends too much because I didn't have a lot of friends in the first grade. I don't really know how people make friends in the first grade anymore. And then when I was in the fifth grade, I took another test and they found I could read at a college level. So my mom took that as being like, I'm going to give you all of the classic books that I think have been classics for the past 200 years. So those were things like Robinson Crusoe, which I just did a presentation on for my PhD. Very helpful. That helped me understand.
Cool.
That presentation was actually geared towards 12-year-old me, who I was like, hey, if I were 12 and rereading this book again for the first time, what would I want to know? So I made that presentation, and I thought it was really cool that I had that experience. Read things like Moby Dick. So I was familiar with a lot of classic literature, and, you know, it just continued throughout high school where I would just pick up things, and I didn't really say no to any book. Everything was readable. Everything was just open to me. And then I was originally a nutrition major when I was at Cornell University. So I really wanted to get into dietetics and help people, you know, eat better. And then I ran into huge roadblocks with like the chemistry requirement and the calculus requirement. And then I was like, no, I need to go back to what I was passionate about. And it was writing. For me, poetry was always a big outlet for me. If I needed to just write to de-stress, or if I had observations about things and I thought about a cool phrase, I needed to get it down, I'd get it down. And by the time I graduated high school, I had written like almost like a chapbook of poems, and I printed all of them out and gave them to my high school teacher. And I'm sure he still has it on his shelf. We keep in touch
That's
pretty
great.
frequently. Yeah, so I've been writing poetry since elementary school, and the first, I guess, like big like poem thing was like when in middle school we were all supposed to write like an ode, you know, like something modeled after Ode to a Grecian Urn, which is not the best example of an ode anymore for me. And everyone was like writing like ode to my dog, or like ode to orange juice. And then I wrote an ode to a nightmare, and it got put in the school library on display, and that was my middle school claim to fame.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
That's a great start. That's really cool.
Yeah, I don't have that original poem anymore, but I have tried to recreate it. I did write another Ode to a Nightmare when I was in undergrad and submitted it for a final portfolio that my professor really enjoyed. So I was glad to have further developed at least that specific poem.
Yeah, that's really cool. Wow. What are some of your goals with your poetry? Like, is there like certain themes you want to explore more in the future, or like certain just like, you know, things you want to resonate with people? I don't know. I'm just curious, like what some of your long-term goals are with your poetry and your writing.
Yeah, they've changed a little over the years. When I was first into poetry, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to write about, but I saw that there was a big gap in that I didn't get to read a lot of LGBTQ poetry. I didn't get to read a lot of Asian poetry. I didn't get to read a lot of any minority poetry. So when I was an undergrad, when I got into upper level division classes, I started reading more of those poets, and I just really enjoyed their work. So I wanted to contribute, you know, my own experiences as an LGBTQ person, as a person with mental health issues, and I want to remove the stigma from mental health issues, and having worked with youth on the spectrum, kids that have all levels of autism. It was very touching to me, and I did write a couple poems based on that. I do want to raise, you know, more, not just awareness, but just acceptance for what a lot of people go through on a daily basis, because people just go through their lives and then don't realize that they think that it's not important when it actually really is, and other people want to connect with you and other people want to hear about it. So I do want to focus on some trauma studies. I want to see how people, are experiencing and dealing with some of their own traumas, however broadly you want to define that. Because a lot of people have even intergenerational trauma was something I was really into. So my grandparents on my dad's side are Japanese Americans, and during World War II, my grandfather and his family and my grandmother and her family got put into the internment camps at Jerome, Arkansas. Um, and it was something that I didn't learn about really until I knew about it a little bit growing up, and then it just wasn't really taught in high schools. And I was like, well, it's really unfair that that part of that American experience, because what they were Americans, even though they had Japanese ancestry. And a lot of people, like my grandfather, he pledged his oath to the U.S. and he served in the U.S. Army, to fight against Japan. He went to Germany. And by the time he got there, the war was over and he got to see the Nazis go on trial, but he was a big part of history. And for him to, do that, to go against, something that is your heritage, I feel like that's just a, very big statement of courage. And it just makes me really sad that a lot of people are ignoring that part of history or pushing it to the side, like, oh, it's not as important as like some of these other issues. And it's just like I get that it's hard to focus on issues such as women's suffrage and slavery. Abortion rights are really big, but a lot of issues like that are getting pushed to the side, and they're getting policed by like people that want to control what education is. So having for me, talking about those experiences and talking about, history, Asian Americans, for people to connect to, is really important, because I didn't read any Japanese Filipino poets. I don't know any Japanese Filipino people, but I know that they're out there. So if they read something of that I wrote, they're like, oh, I could connect with this person, people like me exist. And that's one part of what I want to write about, is this that human experience and creating those connections through like art as a language, or language as an art. And then for my PhD specifically, I do want to focus more on what's called eco-poetics and eco-criticism, which engages the environment, that includes non-humans such as trees and animals, even rocks, the rivers, lakes, and how humans are treating them. And it's usually, you could see, in a very like unfair manner, especially as, industrialization developed, manifest destiny developed, where we have minorities such as Black slaves or Native Americans being treated as the other, being pushed away so that white man can do what they thought God had ordained them to do. Whereas if you see in other Asian cultures and Native American cultures, you see them trying to live in harmony with nature, being very respectful, taking what they need, using every part of the animal. So I'm really interested in the human-animal connection, because just like, kind of like minorities, I feel like snakes are the minorities of the animal world, and that they're not getting enough attention for their importance in the ecology. And there's not a lot of art about them that puts them in a positive light. So I really want to explore how we could, view animals in a way that is not, just human-centric.
That's beautifully said and poignant. Wow, I never thought of it that way, of how, I've always found a lot of use of like the Christian God when it comes to nature, and like you said, manifest destiny, to be very toxic, but I never thought about how destabilizing it is to nature, and how it contrasts with so many other cultures and religions that, like you said, want to live in harmony with nature and want to respect the world that we live in. Whereas, in Christianity, it's very much this idea of, well, God gave us nature, so we have dominance over it, which I think is such a backwards, toxic thing, so.
Yeah, for a very long time, what I have been learning this semester in my classes has been like, God created man to have domination over woman and nature, and then below that was like, devils and things that they shouldn't have gotten involved with, whatever they wanted to define that as. It could have been fairies, it could have been just, other different forms of religion, because that would have gone against God as well. But in whatever the case, it was always, God's will at the top, and then white man right below that. And then if some white women were also enlightened, they were able to read, and their husbands were not as confining to them, but they still had limitations, and they practiced their I guess domination of their environment in the house, whether it be through cooking and cleaning, getting rid of pests. And I'm looking at how we are defining pests. So they're traditionally defined as, say, like rats or mice that carry disease. But if we look at it maybe from like, the rat's point or perspective, the rat doesn't know it has disease. The rat's a living being. The rat wants a place to be safe. The rat wants food. It has needs just like us. And it maybe sees us as the person, as us as the pest. So who's really the pest in this situation?
Oh, wow. This has been one of the most compelling and like thought-provoking like interviews we've had on our podcast so far. Like, thank you so much. I'm trying to think of questions because like you're hitting me with so many thought-provoking things like back to back. I'm like, whoa, like
this no, it takes a lot of time to synthesize, and that's what I do when I sleep is I just like lay down in bed and I'm just like I was like, I'm not the perfect human. I'm the one causing the destruction, when I really know that like I'm just like every day I wake up and commit to capitalism, and I know that it's destroying the environment, but it's you get to that existential phase in my field, and I've had it several times, but I'm trying to deal with it. It's also another writing topic in poetry is how we deal with issues like that are how much control we have over ourselves and our actions and what we do, and how we are defining and redefining what is necessities in this modern age. I have a laptop, I have a phone, those are necessities. I have a pet cat, and he's my family. But we look at third world countries, maybe some animals that are domesticated are for food. They don't have that technology. They're still using oral traditions. So they're still looking at cultural differences. It's just so huge. The range of what we have as necessities in the US is so different from everywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting, while you were talking about your poetry, how you kind of went through like your status as a member of the LGBTQ community, your Asian heritage, and you tied all of that into your love of nature and herpetology, and it just kind of really illustrates how related all of these things are. Of when we're talking about the diversity and the need to care for like each other and our environment, like it really boils down to all of this is just the same need of us to actually look around. And like you really did I think that the way that you kind of explain that really makes it clear of just how related a lot of these topics that at a first glance you wouldn't think are in any way like the same thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is just finding those points of connectedness. And it didn't come overnight. It didn't come right away. And I was really big on the music scene as a percussionist at Cornell University. I played like all the percussion. I did so many groups, almost every ensemble on campus. I did a lot of arranging. And then at the same time I was doing poetry. I was in the herpetology club, and I was like, how are all these things related? And it was really hard for me to relate, say, like my love of music to like my love of snakes, because snakes don't hear very well. They could sense vibrations, but drums are really loud. They have a lot of vibrations. I'm sure that drums would be really disruptive to my snakes, and I would never play a drum right next to my snakes. I know how much that would freak them out. So it's just hard thinking about how I can combine all of my passions into poetry. And I know it might not be in one, it's probably not going to be in one poem. It might not even be in one collection. I do have a collection coming out that is through Cornerstone Press, and that focuses on food and my culture and animals. And I did write another collection that is not out yet. It's looking for a home. That's about my trauma and focuses on some aspects of witchcraft and magic that I'm also really interested in. So it's gonna vary, I guess, from collection to collection to me. And it's just a motivation for me to keep writing, because I just have so many interests and so many different ways of looking at everything.
That is really cool. And I want to say that on our podcast, it's called Nerds and Friends, and kind of our goal when we started this podcast was to have people on to talk about what they're nerdy about or like what they're passionate about. And I think it's so cool how you have so many different passions and you really like embrace them and really like it seems like you, and again, like Will was saying at the beginning of the interview, I don't know how your time management is so on point to have so many passions and hobbies and pursuits and career stuff. But like have you always just been passionate about a lot of things and really like dived into all the things that interest you, or like is that something that you purposely cultivated? Or I'm just curious, like, because I think the happiest people are the people who are passionate about a lot of things. So I think
Oh.
that's really cool, so I want to hear more about that.
I don't want to get into a discussion about how I define happiness right now.
I feel like
But
that could be a whole episode in and of itself,
it is. I am happy with everything that I'm part of. I love the communities I'm part of. I love learning about new things every day and going to school and going to work and interacting with my friends. When I was really young, I just wanted to be that student that just, was just doing their work. And my mom was like, no, you have to do this, and this. You have to read these books. And I know that they're not required for class, but maybe one day they will be, and they never were. But so she always made me super busy. She was the one that made me play piano. She was just like, I feel like this is an Asian thing, and I didn't realize it until later when I read, say, like Amy Tan, or learned about like the traditional tiger mother, which my mother is, and she made me play piano, and I actually really liked it. And she kept pushing me to do more and more things. So by the time I had graduated from the 8th grade, I was in community college. And since I was in community college since I was 13 or 14, I developed this mindset about I need to have really good time management skills. I need to prioritize, assignments that are due first. That meant that, I wasn't going out on weekends to see movies with my friends, because if I went out on weekends, it was for a band competition, it was for a track meet. In college, if I went out on a weekend, it was like an away trip to, say, like we went to another school to play for a hockey game. We had to stay overnight. We went on we did like a parade in NYC. And it was just a matter of me, just picking, what I thought would be best for me. And as a student, I was told, I forgot who said it to me, but they said, when you're in college, you're a student first, you're paying for your education, or someone is paying for your education. That's why you're in, a different state or city to begin with. So that's what you want to prioritize. And I really took that to heart. So I always wanted to get my homework done first. I always wanted to work on papers first. And that's what I do for my students who are currently in my classes. I know that they're students. I know that some of them are working really hard to pay off their education. And I want to make sure that, at least in my class, they're getting what they are that they're paying for, and that, I'm giving them that good feedback. I want to be encouraging. I don't want to be that asshole teacher who's just going to sit there and lecture off of a PowerPoint slide for 50 minutes.
Right.
I want my students to talk to each other and build those kind of communities that maybe I was missing out on in my classes when I was an undergrad. And, I just, for me, I just wanted to prioritize what just made me happy, because it's just, if I wasn't happy in something and it was just a really big struggle for me, and I would try to get help for myself, and I learned self-advocacy, which was really hard for me to speak up as an Asian female. But then after having learned that, and if I couldn't get the help, or if I just couldn't get it, I would just have to switch to something else, and I would just have to just be like, okay, maybe it just wasn't for me, like, at this time, and I could try again later. So it's always prioritizing and picking some things over others. And these days, it's not as hard it was for undergrad. These days, it's like, do I want to play Yu-Gi-Oh, or do I want to go raid right now? Like, so it's like, or it's like, so me and my dad play Hearthstone online every night.
Oh, nice. Hearthstone's awesome.
Yeah, so it's another online card game I play with my dad every night. And my dad also is an assistant tennis coach for the high school, or I think he's the head tennis coach for the high school. And nice. He'll message me, since I'm in Florida, he's in California, the 3-hour difference. He'll be like, oh, I have to give tennis lessons tonight, and he's prioritizing, his students. And then if I have, lesson plans I need to work on, I'll be like, oh, hey, I need to do these lesson plans for my students tomorrow, and we'll just forego playing, because, we want to make sure that that the people under, our charge are, getting what they deserve.
Yeah. That's awesome. Hearthstone's cool. I haven't played that in a hot minute, but that's a fun game. That's cool. Well, this
So
has
you
been. I have
and
so much to think about now because
you just
uh,
hit all of the nerd topics, I think, in one go there.
yes.
Um, I, I think we're like a D&D game away from like you just like having perfected the nerd archetype.
Oh no, I know what D&D is, and I have not played it. I tried getting into Magic, and I couldn't Magic the guy. I have decks that I haven't opened in 4 years, and that's just how it's gonna be. I don't know what's in there. They're there. I have them. I've played, not competitively, but it's the same thing with games, is that prioritizing what games do you want
Mhm.
to invest into. I'm
Yeah.
really invested into Pokemon Go. If I drop $1 to get some raid passes, that's no big deal for me, but am I gonna drop $50 to get Pokemon cards that I'm not gonna play? Then
Oh yeah.
like, no, I'm not going to.
Yeah.
But I will get the raid pass because it's a community bonding thing. So
Yeah. Well, when you can add a social aspect to your hobbies, I feel like that just makes them so much
Oh,
more fulfilling. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, social life has never really been a priority for me. When I was growing up, it was always like my mom, being the tiger mom she was like school, 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 study, study, study. And my dad was a farmer, so he was always working when I was at school. And by the time he came home, he was super tired. But he was just like,
Yeah.
it's okay to go out and like have fun with your friends, and you could have friends. And now that I have friends, they're like, when do you study? And I was just like, I do all of it. I'm a lot better at time management now, and I feel like it gets better every single year. With the more papers I have to write, the more papers I have to grade, things to
mhm.
do, and just write and read. I feel like I'm getting better at it. Whether or not like it's actually happening might be questionable, but I feel confident. So I feel like that's what matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I remember when Pokemon Go first came out, that was like such a wholesome phenomenon when like everyone was playing it and everyone was just like
Yeah.
getting out of the house more. Like it's such a fun game. I love the concept of it's very innovative as a mobile game with the way it incorporates real life movement and social stuff. Oh,
Mhm.
Yeah,
my cat's saying hi.
oh, hi cat. My cat is napping on my bed.
Oh,
I was actually in my first fender bender with a car here in Florida around Lake
oh
Ellen.
no.
No one got hurt.
Oh good.
But she had hit me because she was playing Pokemon Go.
What?
And she wasn't looking.
Oh
She
no.
admitted to it. She took full responsibility. There sure, she was very nice about it, an older lady. She also was really nerdy. She had like TARDIS stickers on her car. She was like geek life, nerd life stickers, and I was like, okay, this is like my type of person, even though she's like 40 years older than me. And then she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. She like, gave me her number, and then like later on, after we did all the claims of the insurance stuff, she was like, here's my friend code, and I was like, what the heck? But like, okay, sure. So that's, I mean, an atypical way to meet a community member, but sure, I'll add you
Yeah.
to my friends list.
That is a fantastic story.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting way. Tallahassee is not the smallest town, but it's also not really a big city.
Yeah.
So when I first came here, having played in San Francisco, been used to the San Francisco, gyms going down every hour and just things turning over so quickly but then like, population, like Pokemon spawns were so big, and I went to Tallahassee and I'm just like, when are people like, what, how am I going to get all these legendaries? And then I found a random Reddit thread where that was like, who plays Pokemon Go in Tallahassee? And I was like, perfect, I hope someone has an answer, and they did, and that's how I joined
Nice.
that community. So it's good to know that there are people in every community that are still out there continuing this tradition of catching Pokemon and trading.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, I think Pokemon Go came out at that perfect time when you had all of the fans that had initially played like Red and Blue that
Yeah.
were now going into their mid 20s and could afford to like drive around to the different parks, in some cases in unfortunate circumstances, it sounds like. But
Yeah, I know the first year it got released, my one of my really good friends was really into the game, and he was driving and had his Pokemon Go app open, accidentally drove into a restricted area, got followed by a police officer, and he
Oh,
had to explain to the police officer that there was a Pikachu and he really wanted it. And the police officer was like, "Sure, kid, just get out of here. This is a restricted area." So yeah, the unfortunate things happen. I feel like the community aspect is definitely a big a big positive. A lot of people have gotten to meet other people because of this game. People are exercising more because of this. I know that I'm exercising a lot more because of this game. I'm constantly hitting my 50 kilometers a week or over. I've gotten to like 75 kilometers a week just by walking because I don't play while driving. And it's just been like just really wholesome. It's just like such a fun, relaxing time.
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, it was, and because I was for a while, I was involved with the Discord. Here in Denver, we had our Denver Pokemon Go Discord, and like that, it's a really nice, like inviting community that where you can have those different people who you wouldn't think would be all into the same thing. Like the Pokemon community in general is just so diverse. And I think part of it is just because it's been around for so long. You had so many people that just grew up with it that it's just became a part of your childhood that you have there. And as everybody went in their own direction, it's just something that I think a lot of people were able to just stay in touch with. And I think that's kind of the beauty that they just started with Gen 1, because then everyone was able to, whether or not you've kept up with it for the last 20 years, everybody was just able to kind of jump back in to and just enjoy this community that kind of came about through that.
Yeah, it's so awesome how many people were able to get themselves out into the community and to make those connections with games. And I think that's also one of the beauties of gaming, especially in person. Like when I go into Yu-Gi-Oh, Yu-Gi-Oh is a little bit more gendered and say that all of them are males except for me. I'm one of the only females that go, which is a little unfortunate, which means that, whenever I go to tournaments, a lot of people want to watch me play because they don't know how girls play. It's like, I don't, and I'm just like, that's really, I think just like a human, I'm also going to be under a lot of pressure now that you're analyzing all my moves. And then like, they're going to be like, oh, I want to like see your deck. And if I had $1 for the amount of times people have asked me if I ran Blue Eyes Chaos Max and if I wanted some of their cards, I would have paid off my health insurance by now, because like everyone thinks that they just know like what's best for you as like either a minority or like a girl. And it's just annoying. That's like, I guess, the downside of the community is that if they're more gendered or if they're more towards like, I don't know, a specific like ideology, they might try to force that on you if you don't really fit into that little box.
Yeah.
It's interesting that same thing, that because I've seen that similar thing in like games like Warcraft or Guild Wars or other MMOs, when you have just a female avatar, that people will just kind of treat you different, and some people will take advantage of that to try to just get people to give them free stuff, or to just underestimate what they're gonna do. Just whether or not in real life they're men or women, they'll just take advantage of that. But this is the first, like I never actually thought of that happening like in real life to an actual person getting treated like that at like a card tournament.
Yeah, it varies from, I guess, group to group. And now that I'm going with a group of friends, I mean, like they are all males, but they know who I am and we're really friendly. I know that, if someone is going to be harassing me because it is the South, there's a lot of like white males who play that might be like trying to talk to me about like, I don't know, Trump or something. Then my friends will like step in and be like, oh, hey, she's not interested in like what if you're selling, or like, and then even, in my local tournament, someone offered me some cards that were for like a stereotypical like girls deck. And then they were just like, oh, you want these? And I was just like, who said that? And they're like, oh no, we just thought you would want them. And I was like, no, I don't. And I messaged the chat, and then they were just like, yeah, sexism is still a thing in games, which shouldn't be a thing because games are for everyone. You know, like that's the beauty about, for me, Pokemon Go, is that you could play regardless of age or like disability or gender, and you could just have a good time. Whereas like if you're in person, you run the risk of those stereotypes because people see who you are and judge you from the outside, which is very unfair, but it's the unfortunate reality of what happens at a lot of gaming conventions that I go to.
Well, I think humanity is slowly, and hopefully it gets all the way there, progressing past such petty, things that have been so prevalent in society and history, sadly, so.
Yeah. It is, and it's the same in academia. We read a lot of old white males. Shakespeare is like the standard for poetry, and Shakespeare pisses me off for a lot of reasons, and a lot of people today are just like, oh, how could you not like Shakespeare? And I was just like, Shakespeare wrote a lot of the same thing, just with different characters, and he wrote a lot of, he did contribute a lot. I'm not going to dismiss that, he didn't do anything. It's just that, he's been, overstudied for me. It's just something that once you do every single year, you just don't want to do anymore. Right. It's no longer like a fun literary tradition for me. I want to see, what women in that period have been writing. I want to see what marginalized communities have been writing. Yeah. And I really want to kind of focus my work on, how literature that was maybe perceived as bad because the writer was a person of color has, evolved over time, and how that can contribute to today's, the way how we're reading modern literature.
Yeah.
And I think especially with art, art is one of the things where you're most heavily influenced by what is around you and like the different cultures that you get exposed to. But I feel like, especially in academia, where a lot of the classes and the general teaching around art tends to be very Eurocentric, based almost entirely, there's our second cat. It tends to be very Eurocentric, which is, and very also Christian centric, which is really unfortunate, I think, because like we see so much of that it's just, it stops being interesting after a while. Whereas there's so many different cultures throughout the world and so many different places and people with different experiences that when you start seeing like the artistic movements from other places, it just really opens a whole different genre is not necessarily the right word, but a whole different experience that you can live vicariously through these different artists.
It is. I feel like world art and world poetry and world literature should be more required of some of the general curriculum rather than some of like the same old things we've been teaching. I'm not saying that like, oh, Catcher in the Rye and Grapes of Wrath are bad books. I'm just saying that, there are different minorities who have written really good novels that also contribute to the American experience that are, exploring those same tropes, and that we could teach in different ways that are appealing to our more diverse student body these days. And even, at Florida State, is probably not as diverse as I was used to. At Cornell, there was a lot of diversity. There were clubs for everything and anyone, and it was so easy and almost overwhelming to find things that you really liked. And then University of San Francisco had I believe it was like the most diverse, like it was like the most diverse college in like the nation at one point, and awesome. They were super friendly, super welcoming. And then like I come here, and then I have like a lot of just negative experiences with some of the people who have just been living in the South their whole life, and maybe have never been taught by an Asian person before, or never been taught by an Asian female person before. And I know that I look really young, and that I'm not that much older than most of my students, and it's just kind of sad to see that they didn't get that they didn't learn, I guess, through literature, through the culture that they were raised in, that people of different cultures still have something to contribute that you could learn from, and that you don't just need to stick with what you know. to get a really good academic experience. And in fact, I think that to get the most out of your academic experience is that you go kind of outside your comfort zone. You take classes with you take classes that are going to challenge you. You take classes that you don't know much about. I'm in a 18th century British Restoration literature class, which I know nothing about. And I'm learning so much, both from my classmates and my really smart professor, and all of the literature she's having us read. And it's just so enriching getting to work with students from a variety of backgrounds. And I just wish that, you know, more people in the South, you know, would just be more open to learning from people like me.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. I've found that for me, growing up in Colorado Springs, which is not a very diverse place, unfortunately, that when I moved to Los Angeles and started working on like movie sets and stuff, which the film industry, people come from all over the world to work in the film industry. So just I've gotten to meet so many awesome people from so many awesome places, and it's just really broadened my worldview in a really great way. And I'm so glad I did it, because there's so much more than just little Colorado Springs, you know, Colorado. Like, the world is such a big place, and there's so many cool perspectives out there. And yeah, people who are missing out on that, is just sad, you know, because there's so much cool stuff, so many cool perspectives and art and culture and writing. And yeah.
There is, and I hope that, you know, my writing and my art and even the work that I do with the animals is going to help enrich people's lives. When I don't really work in the education department at the Tallahassee Museum, although if people have questions, I'm able to answer. Even some of the full-time employees that don't work with the snakes, I could tell them a few facts about the snakes that they didn't know. So it's always enriching, you know, for everyone, as long as you're willing to learn, which is that's why college towns are great places, is because most people are willing to learn in college towns and college cities.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's a great place to end, right on that note of like, be willing to learn. Like, that's one of the best ways to like have a fulfilling life, is like, be willing to explore new things, you know. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think about all the opportunities that I would have missed if I didn't come into my Yu-Gi-Oh community and learn how to do different combos from other people. If I didn't learn about some of the metas that people were doing for PvP and Pokemon Go. So I really have those communities to thank for helping establish me in Tallahassee, in addition to my cohort who is helping to establish me in academia at this level, at the PhD level. And I'm really thankful that, you know, I'm open to learning and that they're open to learning from me. It's such an enriching experience.
That's awesome. Well, Hikari, this has been such a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for your time. We'd love to have you back on the podcast another time. This was fantastic. And yeah, for everyone listening, in the podcast description or the video description, we'll put a link where you can find all of Hikari's works. You know, you can send me some links after this, and I'll put them in there for people to see, because this was awesome. I want people to read your stuff and see your social media and stay plugged in with all the awesome stuff you got going on, you know?
Yes, thank you so much. This was such a fun first podcast experience. Now, if anyone invites me to a podcast, I'm going to be like, well, was it like Nerds and Friends? Because if it's not, then maybe I'm not interested. So thank you guys for having me on the podcast. I can't wait to connect with you guys more. And it was just such a wonderful experience.
My cat is grabbing my webcam right now. That's why
he
has both his paws around it. Yeah.
I was wondering what you were doing
like,
there.
I thought you were gonna like fade out, and I was like, oh, maybe I could also fade out.
It has a little tripod, and he's got paws around 2 of the 3 legs.
Aww.
So it might go down in a minute. But no, this was fantastic. Thank you so much, Hikari, and we'll stay in touch. And I'll let you know when we upload this. And good to go. This was awesome.